long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there's a nation called the United States of West Korea. And of course, I'm not talking about this planet or anything here, because this planet's perfect, paradise, peace forever. But in this far off galaxy, the United States of West Korea had begun to censor their internet and everything that the people had seen. And no one understood what was going on. Sometimes you try to tell them, and they freak out and they go ape rage on you. You become this demon. They'd become a demon. You'd become the demon supposedly, but they become the enraged demon with the violent tendency. And in this galaxy, far, far off, a long time ago, there's these things called the BRICS nations. And then, so during this time frame, China urged the BRICS nations to strengthen world stability. BRICS members backed China's call for world stability and expansion. And in this far-off galaxy, the BRICS countries were called Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Before, when I spoke of this galaxy, I might have called it South America because, to be honest, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I believe that South Africa was on their side, so I like to assume that South America is actually on it, and they're probably just scared to say they're part of it, so I like to say that. But here's some things I found when I was studying this galaxy. There's the United States of West Korea versus the BRICS. So that was 4 years ago. That was 4 years before the BRICS started a war and supposedly started a war. You see, the underlying context was that the BRICS nations had started a war, yet there was war already going on around them, and they had begun to set up a defensive front against that. They sent up an offensive defensive front once certain nations got taken over in a matter of 2 days. It was pretty fast takeover nations, so it must have scared these nations when the United Empire of West Korea had moved in upon the BRICS nations. Just a little closer. They'd already been moving upon them for a long time, maybe 6,000 years. And in this alternate universe, there's this group called NATO, probably something to do in North Korea. Their language is different. NATO probably stands for United Nations of West Korea. Their language is a little bit different than ours sometimes. Galaxy far, far away, their writing's a little bit different. And they had begun, the war was going on for a long, long time. And at one point in time, the BRICS countries had called to stop using the currency of West Korea. As you can see there. I mistakenly in the past, I don't remember when exactly I learned about the BRICS. I thought it was like in the 80s or something, because it was one of those old pieces of knowledges that I don't remember how I knew, really. Supposedly that had formed 16 years before the unified BRICS nations had moved in on the West Korean Empire. And at one point in time, about 4 years into it, they added South Africa, which might have been a fatal flaw for them. And to be honest, I don't believe the BRIC nation itself, the BRIC alliance, would consider South Africa an ally. They might bring them to the table, but I assume that the Brazil, Russia, India, China has separate meetings where they exclude South Africa, because if they're smart, they might understand that South Africa was pretty much part of the West Korean Empire and was taken over and founded. I'm sure they existed and was founded before, but the now known South Africa very well may have been part of the West Korean Empire. Here we have a report from this other galaxy. The BRICS countries work to separate from monetary system based on US dollar. This was the time frame here. This is a month ago. That's about when this war started in this galaxy. So, in this other galaxy here, the West Korean Empire had its people convinced they were the freest, bravest, and most powerful people on the planet. And in many ways they were. And in many ways they were given that power to do so. In many ways they did have the power to control things. But it was all under an illusion. They repeated words like, "We are free, we are free." And if you didn't repeat those words, "We are free," you get 10 lashes. So every morning you had to wake up and say, "We are free. We are the freest empire of the world. West Korea has freedom." You repeat, "West Korea has freedom," 10 times, or you get 10 lashes. Every morning, they would even raise their infants like this. The baby would come out of the womb, and they would wait. They had the West Korean authorized hospitals using the all of the hospitals had the West Korean religion. Koreanity, they called it. Every hospital was named after Koreanity. So the second they came out of the womb, they were born into Koreanity. And they knew they were free. And if the baby cried and did not say in between its cries 10 times, "West Korea, we are the freest," they would get 10 lashes, even straight out of the womb. So everyone there would just sit around and repeat, "West Korea is the freest there is on the planet." And if anyone disagreed with them, they got 10 lashes. And they would go to other places and they would tell them, "West Korea is free. You must join us because we are free." And if they said no, they would get 10 lashes each. If they were lucky, they would only get 10 lashes. Sometimes West Korea liked to spread their freedom indiscriminately and excessively, and people would get more than 10 lashes for not saying West Korea is free. And the media eventually began to get locked down, so West Korea did not see anything else. So anyone within West Korea's borders was not allowed to see the other nations and what they were doing, which is odd because West Korea had recently faced some troubles, some weird shifts. It's like their minds had all been controlled and shifted, and they almost begin to work against each other rather than unite under the banner of "we are free or else we're going to give you 10 lashes." And then the other nations begin to move on them during this time frame. It's almost as if West Korea had been infiltrated by the other nations in this galaxy. And I don't. We can make assumptions. We can make a really logical assumption of how exactly everyone in West Korea shifted all at once. But that's not what this video is about. And I don't think it's part of the plot line of the story me to discuss how the beings shift on this galaxy. Some say there's gods and angels who can control people in their minds. And some thought that there was simply radio waves and telecommunication waves and video and audio waves that had that could alter their brains. That's one excuse they had. And then of course Koreanity had also worked with this. Even though Koreanity technically was supposedly created for different purposes, that's what they claim. But they also claim that West Korea was free as well, and a lot of people might have disagreed with West Korea being free if they were outside that land, or if they wanted to get 10 lashes and they were inside that land. And then it looks like at this point in the storyline that the world has chosen to rise up against West Korea. But West Korea, for some reason, was not educating its people properly. It in fact had begun to dumb them down further and Koreanitize them even deeper than they had been before. And there's something about the spirits in this world, the angels, the demons, the lords, the people. Some of them have begun to. Maybe they always were. Maybe some of them always were filled with the demon of I don't know of Koreanity, Koreanity. But a lot of people started to become very hostile, even more hostile than they were before. 10 lashes would soon turn to 50 lashes. 50 lashes would soon turn to losing 2 fingers. If you begin to speak anything that the Koreanity, the West Korean Empire, did not like. Including there being the overtake of their nation, which even like it's almost like the most Koreanitized people were going along with it. It's almost like they were pushing for their downfall more than anyone else, while some were like, no, I like the West Korea where we were free. Keep in mind, it wasn't actually free, but they liked it when it was freer. And they didn't like the new form of freedom where it didn't add up to perfection for them. But many of the others, if not all, had went along with them. And so there's this huge shift going on And the West Korean Empire, their people weren't prepared for anything coming along, but they should have been. They were shown the signs. The takeover that had occurred in the West Korean Empire, it was very obvious and out front, and it's laughable to anyone, even the ones who support the Korean Empire, who could see it. It's technically like laughable that could have even happened and anyone could have went along with it, but it still went. And so now we have this civilization a long time ago in a far off galaxy at a turning point. But no one knows it's at a turning point yet in their empire, because their empire has isolated themselves and not allowed anyone to hear anything else. And so it's turned from West Korea is the best and the freest to something else. And they're not even allowed to discuss it. They don't even want to discuss that. They've been so free for so long that nothing bad can ever happen to them, and nothing ever will, because they're the freest and they've been chosen to be the freest, and they're the best at being the freest. And so there's just simply, there's no discussion. They've been taught there's no discussion of whether West Korea is free or not, to the point that even if it would get taken over by an invading empire, it would still be considered the freest nation, the freest empire the galaxy had ever seen. And so it could just get taken over like that, and then all of a sudden, like, they're still worshiping the freedom of the West Korean Empire.